From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
We're still in chapter 7 of Judges, and we talked about Gideon and the dividing of the army. You know, he sent some home. He's down to 300 soldiers in the army, and he is going to fight the host of Midian, which is not just Midian, but it's also the Ishmaelites, which are what we call the Arabs today, and the people from the east, which are also probably Arab people, but there's actually three nations that are allied against Israel. And they have this big host. It's really big. And Gideon's down to 300. And of course, he's spying, he's listening in on a couple of the Midianite soldiers who are probably on guard duty. And they should be talking about, boy, we're going to get these Israelites tomorrow, because they got them outnumbered and all of this stuff. And yet, what are they talking about? They're talking about the dream that they had. And just to review real quick, verse 13 of chapter 7, and when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian and came into a tent and smote it that it fell and overturned it, and the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the man of Israel. For unto his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. Now, they both had a dream, this cake of barley. Now, what was Gideon doing when he was called? He was threshing barley. So he's the cake of barley. He's just a piece of bread that's going to roll down into the Midianite camp and destroy it. So these guys are talking about this like it's going to happen. And so it says that Gideon worshiped the Lord, because this is confirmed that God's still with him. So we go to verse 15, and it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation that he worshiped and returned to the host of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered unto your hand the host of Midian. And he divided the 300 men unto 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said to them, Look unto me, and do likewise. And behold, and when I come to this outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, ye shall do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So that's what they do. They break the pitchers, they have the lamps, and they cry, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And all the host, verse 21, and all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow. Now, what's happening here is, usually in these times, they did not fight a battle at night. They'd fight in the daytime, not very often at night, because you have thousands of troops, hard to communicate, very easy to get turned around and not know what you're doing. And the pitchers and the lamps, if they did fight at night, the armies would have a lamp man and a trumpet man for about every 1,000 soldiers. So if they see 300 lamps and 300 horns, they're going to think there's 300,000 Israelites. And that's exactly what happened. They came at them from all directions. God put confusion on them, and they started killing each other. Every man's sword was against his fellow. So they're stumbling around in the dark, and they're killing each other because They think that they're being attacked by an army that's bigger than theirs. Okay, so, and every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host, and the host fled unto Bethshittah in Zerath, and to the border of Abel, Meolah, and Tabbath. Now these are places down the Jordan River, down the valley. And the men of Israel gathered themselves out of Naphtali and out of Asher and out of Manasseh and pursued after the Midianites. So the other tribes are starting to get involved here. See, they should have been involved from the first. But now that they see that the Midianites are defeated, or they're going to jump in to the battle now, well, see, that shows how disunited the tribes were. They should have all been working together to fight the army. So they're jumping in. Verse 24, Gideon sent messages throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Bethbarah and Jordan. And all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and took the waters unto Bethbarah and Jordan. Now what this means is, Ephraim came out and they took over the fords of the river, where you cross the river. The ford in the river is the shallow part, where you can kind of walk across. It's not too deep. And those are important because when you have a big army, you want to cross them in the shallowest place you can. You don't want them getting sucked down the river. But the Ephraim warriors took the fords and prevented the Midianites from crossing the river. So they're getting involved. Ephraim's now getting involved. Another tribe should have been there from the first. And they took two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock, Oreb, and Zeeb they slew at the winepress of Zeeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon on the other side of Jordan. So they captured a couple of the kings, they killed them on the spot. Well, that's what they did in those days. Had it been reversed, and Gideon would have been captured, they would have killed him on the spot. So, and the men of Ephraim said unto him, why hast thou served us thus, that thou callest not, when thou wentest to fight with the Midianites? And they did chide with him sharply. So they're saying, why didn't you come get us when the war started? Well, I think that since all of Israel was under the yoke of the Midianites, they should have all been willing to go to battle. That was the way God supposed to, had them organized before. If you look at the Israel when they come out of Egypt, they're organized. They have tribes here, tribes here, tribes here, all around the Levites and all around the ark. They're in a certain order and they're marching through the desert. They're not just straggling through the desert. They are organized. They have three tribes, and they're all marching together in a formation. So Israel was supposed to go to war together, not singly. If one tribe was attacked, everybody's supposed to help them. So Ephraim saying, how come you didn't get us into the war? And they said to them, and he said to them, what have I done now in comparison of you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God hath delivered into your hands the princes of Midian and Oreb and Zeeb, and what was I able to do in comparison of you? And then their anger was abated toward him when he had said that. So he made kind of a little concession to him. He said, well, you captured these two kings. So that's your glory. That's your part in the war. You captured these kings. And that's better than anything I've done. He's just being diplomatic here. He's trying to win them over, avoid a fight between the two tribes of some kind. And he wants to finish getting rid of the Midianites. So, verse 4, it says, Gideon came into Jordan and passed over, he and the 300 men that were with him, faint yet pursuing them. So they're hungry. They're They've been chasing these guys for a while. They're starting to get hungry and thirsty. They need to get some provisions. And he said to the men of Succoth, give, that's a town, give, I pray you. Now these are Israelites. He's asking them to help. Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, for they be faint, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. And the princes of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread into thine army? So they're saying, no, we're not going to help you. You know, they're refusing bread to the soldiers of Gideon. So, that's not very good. And Gideon said, therefore, when the Lord hath delivered Zebah and Zalmunna unto mine hand, then I will tear your flesh with thorns in the wilderness and with briars. So he said, I'm going to get you when I'm done. And that's what he does. And he went up thence to Penuel and spake unto them likewise, and the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered him. So Penuel's not going to give him any provisions either. And he spake unto the men of Penuel, saying, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. So he's got two of the towns on the way that are refusing to help him. They're refusing to just give bread. He's not even asking them to fight. Just give us bread so we can keep, pursuing the enemy. Well, no, we're not going to do that. So why they did that, I don't know. You would think, again, they're all supposed to be united. Why wouldn't they help their fellow tribes pursue the Midianites? Well, maybe they had some deal going with them. Who knows? Maybe they liked the Midianites. See, some people like oppression. Some people like being under the yoke. In Egypt, some of the Israelites preferred the Egyptians to freedom. They kept saying, let's go back. We had food, we had water, we had shelter. We're out here in the desert with nothing, So some people prefer to be oppressed. And so maybe they liked the Midianite, maybe they liked having the Midianites over them. But for whatever reason, they didn't help them. And so now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their hosts with them, about 15,000 men, all that were left of all the hosts of the children of the east. For there fell 120,000 men that drew the sword. So that's how many of the Midianites were dead. They're down to 15,000, so they had, 135,000 in their host when they started. So that's a pretty big army for the day. And Gideon went up by the way of them that dwelt in tents in the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and smote the host, for the host was secure. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them and took the two kings of Midian and discomfited all the hosts. So he captured them and destroyed the rest of the Midianite army. So he's got 4 kings that he's captured. And Gideon the son of Joash returned from battle before the sun was up, and caught a young man of the men of Succoth, and inquired of him, and he described to him the princes of Succoth, the elders, even 70 men. And he came unto the men of Succoth and said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom you did upbraid me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto thy men that are weary? And he took the elders of the city and the thorns of the wilderness, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. And he beat down the tower of Penuel and slew the men of the city. So he did just what he said. You didn't help me. I've got these kings that I've captured. This is the proof that the Midianites are destroyed. You didn't help me, so I'm going to get back at you. And then he said unto Zebah and Zalmunna, what manner of men were they whom you slew at Tabor? And they answered, as thou art, so were they. Each one resembled the children of the king. And he said, they were my brethren, even the sons of my mother. As the Lord liveth, if he had saved them alive, I would not slay you. So these 2 kings were responsible for killing some of Gideon's family. So he's going to kill them. That's the way it is. I mean, this is what was done. I mean, if somebody killed your relative, you were allowed to get revenge. That's called a blood feud. We still have those today in some places, Hatfields and McCoys, that's a blood feud. That was a blood feud. That was two families, who knows who started what, and they would, go after each other, and then they'd have a little truce, and they'd go after each other again. That's the kind of thing that people do even today. Lots of places in the world. If your relative gets killed by somebody else's relative, then you go after him, even today. So that's what Gideon's doing. And it was not against the law of Moses to do that. And he said, verse 20, said unto Jether his firstborn, up and slay them. But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared, because he was yet a youth. And Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise thou and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. So he told his son to kill these kings, and the son didn't want to do it. So the kings are mocking him, and he's saying, well, your son's just like you. He's fearful. So Gideon did it himself. And so the commentaries say, here his son is fearful, just like Gideon was fearful. He started out fearful, but now he's getting pretty bold. As he goes and has success and victory, he's starting to get puffed up. And you see less and less of him saying, God's helping me. It's getting more like Gideon's doing this. So that's going to be something that's going to be his downfall, because as we look in verse 22, then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. So they want to make him a king. Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. So he's giving credit to the Lord. He's saying, I don't want to be your king. God is supposed to rule over you. And at this time, there were no kings, so that was the plan. God was supposed to be the ruler of Israel through the priests and the prophets and the leaders that were picked, but there was no king. He didn't want to be a king. He didn't put himself in that position because he understood enough. Now, I don't know where Gideon got his knowledge of the Lord, because Israel's pretty scattered here. I couldn't find anything about where's the tabernacle, where are the priests, where's the sacrifices going on. It's all supposed to be going on in Israel. And I could not find anybody in commentaries or anything to say, well, they hid the tabernacle, or they moved it, or something. So I'm just assuming that nothing was being done, that the priests were scattered, the tabernacle was somewhere, and they're not being taught. Now, the priests were supposed to teach the people about God. That's one of the things the priests were supposed to do, was to instruct the people in the knowledge of God and what he expected, how to live, what the law was, the sacrifices, all this stuff was supposed to be done by the priests, the Levites. So I don't know where Gideon got his knowledge of God at all, because his father had a statue of Baal on his property, and most people were worshiping Baal. Now, they had a knowledge of God from somewhere, but it's not very strong. But he does refuse the kingship, but then he turns around and says, verse 24, and Gideon said, I would have a request of you, that you would give me every man the earrings of his prey, for they had gold earrings. They were Ishmaelites. And they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a garment and did cast therein every man the earrings of his prey. In other words, they killed these Midianites. They took the gold off them. They had ornaments. They had earrings and bracelets and different things, and they took them off them. That was their plunder. That was, what they did in war. And it said that the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. That's about 40 pounds. Besides ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were on their camels' necks. So, here we come to verse 27. And Gideon starts to fall apart. Gideon made an ephod. Now, the ephod, there was the ephod that the high priest wore, and it's just an overgarment. It's like a coat over their coat. They had long coats that the priests wore, but this was like a thing that went over their chest and their back. Now, in Israel's case, it was gold, and it had the stones. It had 12 stones, each stone representing one of the tribes, on the front and on the back. That was the high priest's ephod. And the high priest wore that when he was making sacrifice and all of that, and it was supposed to put the tribes in the remembrance of God, and God in the remembrance of the tribes. So there was that ephod, but then the commentaries say that there were other garments. Now, David wore an ephod when he danced when they brought the ark back from the Philistines. But he wasn't wearing the ephod of the high priest. So it was possible to have another type of thing. And so what he did is he made a garment for himself and probably put an image of some god on there, like Baal or a golden calf, just like in the wilderness. See, there's this undercurrent. Where did they get the idea for the golden calf in the wilderness? Well, they'd been in Egypt. That was an Egyptian god. They'd seen that worship. But if you read the Old Testament, when they came out of Egypt, there was a mixed multitude that went with them. See, the way I understand it is that when they put the blood over the doorposts, any slave in Egypt could have got in that house, whether he was an Israelite or not, and gone and been spared. That's the way I understand. See, the Egyptians had more than just Israelite slaves. They had slaves from all the nations they conquered. So any slave that got into a house with the blood over it could have gone free. And that's what happened. When they went out the desert, there was this mixed multitude of non-Israelites that went with them. Now, they weren't the ones, they weren't really sold on this, God of the Israelites. They were just going along because they got out of bondage. And so when they built the golden calf, somebody gave them the picture of how to do it. Just like here, somebody's giving him this idea to make an ephod. Now, I think, and this is my opinion, I can't find any commentary because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of these Bible commentaries that don't believe in things like religious spirits. They don't believe in things like generational curses or strongholds in your life, or even demons. I mean, we went to a church where they don't have deliverance services because they figure, I guess, when you get saved and baptized and you put on your three-piece suit or your long dress, the devil leaves you alone, so they don't need deliverance. And Linda knows what I'm talking about. Am I right? That organization, to my knowledge, does not do deliverance services. So I think what we've got here is a religious spirit that is going around, and Gideon doesn't have a lot of training, and these things will come back and influence what people do. Now, we've seen religious spirits here. Linda knows what I'm talking about. I've seen them. People just are not going to give up that old whatever, that old Baptist doctrine or that old Pentecostal doctrine or whatever it is. Their mama did it, grandma did it, and I'm not changing. Now, that is a religious spirit. It doesn't mean you're not saved, because Gideon's in the book, he's in Hebrews. He's in the book of Hebrews. He's one of the Hall of Fame, what people call the Hall of Fame. But when you're in ministry, and I'll say this, we're getting ready to close, and if you've been up here or you've been in ministry, you're out talking, witnessing, whatever you're doing for God, the devil will do one of two things. First of all, he'll try to get you not to do it. He'll say, well, you're nothing. Who are you? Go out and lay hands, or who are you to witness? If you can't do that, and you go ahead and do it, and you get victory, he'll be right there to say, man, you're great. Oh, you're the best. You're God's man. You're God's woman. You better get on TV. You better get something going. You better do this. See? That's the other thing. He'll whisper in your ear, and he'll say, you're the next Billy Graham. You're the next whoever. And people will respond to that. A lot of these ministers that got in trouble for sex and all this were already in trouble long before that, because they were already listening to that little voice that said, you got God's end time ministry. So the devil does that. He'll get on and he'll say, man, you're the best. You're the best. Boy, you had them tonight. You had them. Boy, they got the message. They got healed. That's all you. And I think that's what's going on here, is that Gideon, he got puffed up. You're seeing it, the whole thing. He's not talking about God very much. It's all about me now. And he made this ephod. And of course, if you finish reading, you'll see that Israel started worshiping the ephod. It became a snare. It became an idol. And he was the judge for 40 years, but after that, they were in bondage again. So that's what happens when people get used by God and they don't, they don't listen to the right. And he doesn't have anybody around him telling him with any discernment. I can't find anybody who's got any discernment. There's no priest to say, like David, to say, thou art the man, or, repent or something. There's nobody around him. So we shouldn't be too hard on him, but this is what can happen, is that we can get our little ministry going and get, why, this is my ministry. God called me. But remember, none of us are indispensable. Nobody in this building is indispensable. If you don't want to do what God wants you to do, he'll find somebody else. So beware. If you're in ministry, you'll hear that voice. If you haven't heard it, just hang around. You will.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.